Here's a truth that will make you uncomfortable. The most loyal employees are often the easiest targets for workplace betrayal. While everyone talks about office politics and competition, nobody warns you about the silent assassins. Those who smile while they steal your knowledge, who thank you while they plot your replacement, who learn from you while they learn to eliminate you. The professional environment we trust to reward dedication often punishes it instead, turning our greatest strengths into our most dangerous vulnerabilities. You've probably been told that hard work pays off, that loyalty is valued, that helping others succeed will secure your own position. These are beautiful lies that keep good people vulnerable to systematic exploitation. The most devastating betrayals don't come from obvious enemies. They come from the colleagues you mentor, the projects you build, the trust you freely give. What if I told you that your generosity, your expertise, your willingness to teach others might be the very tools being used to orchestrate your professional downfall? The story I'm about to share will challenge everything you believe about workplace loyalty and corporate fairness. It's about a dedicated employee who made room for someone new, only to watch that person systematically erase her from the very position she had helped him understand. But more importantly, it's about the painful learning that transformed a naive mentor into a wise professional who finally understood the game being played around her. This isn't just another tale of office politics. It's a masterclass in recognizing the warning signs before they destroy your career, in protecting your intellectual property while still being helpful, in understanding the difference between being valued and being used. The lessons hidden in this experience could save you from years of frustration, disappointment, and professional betrayal. If you've ever felt invisible despite your contributions, if you've watched others receive credit for your work, if you've been pushed aside after training your own replacement, then this story will feel like looking into a mirror. But unlike most workplace horror stories, this one comes with a solution, a way to maintain your integrity while protecting your interests, to help others without sacrificing yourself, to trust wisely rather than blindly. From his very first day at the company, I made it my mission to welcome him, not out of obligation, but because I believed everyone deserves a chance to grow. I had been there for years, knew every detail of that department, and thought I could help him adapt. I never imagined my gesture would be the beginning of my erasure. There's something beautiful about mentorship when it's genuine, that moment when you see someone's potential and decide to nurture it. But there's also something tragically naive about assuming everyone shares your same values of loyalty and gratitude. The way he looked at me in the beginning still haunts my memory. On that first day, he seemed lost, overwhelmed by the corporate maze that had become second nature to me. I guided him, introduced him to the team, explained our systems with the patience of someone who genuinely cared about his success. He looked at me with what I interpreted as respect, maybe even admiration. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. His eyes held a hunger I mistook for eagerness to learn, when in reality it was ambition calculating its next move. The first night I stayed beyond working hours should have been a red flag, but instead it felt like validation. The manager asked for someone to teach him the new process, and as usual, everyone found excuses to avoid the extra responsibility. I stayed. I always stayed. He thanked me profusely, said he wouldn't have managed without my guidance. Little did I know that effort would later be weaponized against me in ways I couldn't imagine. That gratitude felt warm then, but now I realize it was just the first payment in a transaction I didn't know I was making. What I shared without realizing the consequences still makes me question my own judgment. I opened my digital vault, my files, my spreadsheets, my personal productivity shortcuts accumulated over years of dedication. I opened my computer like I was sharing a notebook filled with years of hard-earned experience. I didn't think about protection, only about helping another human being succeed. Trust, I learned, is a luxury that loyal employees can't afford in today's professional environment. When I started being called too nice, a colleague joked that he was being trained to replace me. I laughed at the time, but felt a chill run down my spine. I pushed the thought away, like someone avoiding looking at a car coming too fast toward them. That comment was a warning disguised as humor, but my heart was too generous to see the truth hidden in plain sight. The signs were there, painted in bright red letters, but I chose to read them as friendly concern rather than prophetic warning. The frustration of being overlooked began subtly, like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it immediately, but one day you realize you're running on empty. My years of experience, my institutional knowledge, my unwavering dedication, all of it was being transferred to someone who saw opportunity where I saw friendship. The professional environment I had trusted was teaching me a harsh lesson about the difference between being valued and being used. But the real learning was just beginning. Every mentor knows the bittersweet moment when the student surpasses the teacher, but this felt different. This felt like theft disguised as growth, like betrayal wrapped in the language of progress. I had opened my door to help someone climb, never suspecting he was planning to push me off the ladder once he reached my level. The trust I had built over years was being dismantled in weeks, and I was the one handing him the tools to do it. Yet something tells me this story is just getting started. Within days, he was already being mentioned in meetings while my name started disappearing from the credits. The team began to see him as a promise, and me as part of the past. It's fascinating how quickly a professional environment can shift its loyalty from substance to novelty. Years of consistent performance suddenly seem less valuable than fresh enthusiasm and a charming smile. The corporate world, I realized, has a shorter memory than I ever imagined, and an even shorter attention span for those who quietly deliver results without fanfare. The first time he was praised for my work remains etched in my memory like a scar. During a presentation, he used a model I had created, not just inspired by my work, but literally copy-pasted from my files. The manager praised his innovative initiative, while I sat there feeling my professional identity being stolen in real time. He simply smiled and didn't correct the misattribution. I was in that room, witnessing my own erasure, feeling a knot form in my throat that would take months to dissolve. That moment taught me that silence can be more violent than any direct confrontation. When eyes began to look through me instead of at me, I knew the tide had turned. I became invisible in hallway conversations, ignored in brainstorming sessions, treated like background furniture in my own workplace. They talked with him, laughed with him, looked at me like someone observing an old piece of furniture that no longer fits the room's aesthetic. The professional environment I had helped build was now treating me as outdated inventory. My experience became a liability rather than an asset. My loyalty a sign of complacency rather than dedication. The invitation that never came to me was perhaps the most telling sign of my changing status. They organized a team lunch, a casual gathering to boost morale and strengthen bonds. He was invited. I discovered this through social media, seeing photos where even the receptionist was present. Everyone except me. The exclusion wasn't accidental, it was strategic. They were already practicing life without me, testing how the group dynamic would function in my absence. The message was clear. I was no longer considered part of the team's future. The silent warning of new leadership came disguised as cross-training and knowledge sharing. The manager started asking me to delegate more tasks to him, framing it as professional development and succession planning. But underneath the corporate jargon, I could hear the truth. They were systematically emptying my role. Every responsibility I transferred was another step toward my own obsolescence. The trust I had in the system was being used against me, turning my cooperation into complicity in my own professional demise. The frustration of watching someone else receive credit for your life's work is a special kind of torture. It's like watching someone else wear your clothes and receive compliments on their style. Every presentation he gave using my frameworks, every solution he proposed based on my research, every innovation he claimed that was built on my foundation, it all felt like pieces of my professional soul being distributed to someone else. The learning curve I had climbed over years was being packaged and handed to him as a gift, while I stood by watching my own expertise being rebranded. The realization that I was being systematically replaced hit me like a cold wave. This wasn't about natural succession or healthy competition. This was about strategic elimination. They had found someone younger, cheaper, more malleable, and they were using my own knowledge and dedication as the bridge to transition him into my position. The professional environment I had trusted was orchestrating my departure, while keeping me around long enough to complete the knowledge transfer. But the real shock was still coming. A week later, he was awarded Employee of the Month for the same work I had taught him, the same process I had implemented, now carrying his name instead of mine. I watched from the back of the room, standing against the wall like a ghost observing her own funeral. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was witnessing the celebration of my own professional death. The trust I had placed in the system was being used to publicly humiliate me, turning my mentorship into a weapon against my own career. There's something particularly cruel about being forced to watch someone else receive applause for your life's work. The photograph that was never meant for me captured the moment perfectly. They took a picture of him holding the trophy, surrounded by smiling colleagues, everyone celebrating his innovative contributions. I forced a smile from my corner, thinking about the nights I had skipped dinner to perfect those reports, the weekends I had sacrificed to meet impossible deadlines. The image would later be posted on the company's social media, a permanent reminder of how easily dedication can be erased and rewritten. That photo became a symbol of everything wrong with corporate loyalty, or the lack thereof. The comment that crushed me internally came from someone I had trained years ago. "He's been doing truly innovative work." The words were spoken loudly enough for me to hear, while eyes looked at me as if I no longer belonged in that space. The professional environment I had helped build was now treating me like an outdated relic, someone whose time had passed. My years of experience were being reframed as obsolescence, my dedication as complacency. The frustration of being invisible in your own workplace is a special kind of professional torture. The absence that nobody noticed the next day was perhaps the most telling sign of my changing status. I took half a day off, something I rarely did, hoping someone would ask why or notice my missing presence. But the silence was deafening. No one inquired about my whereabouts. No one felt the impact of my absence. It was as if I had already been erased from the daily operations, my contributions so thoroughly transferred that I was no longer essential. The realization that I had become dispensable was more painful than any direct confrontation. The certainty that I had been used began to crystallize with uncomfortable clarity. I started to see that from the very beginning, the plan was exactly this: extract my knowledge, transfer it to someone more aligned with their vision, then push me aside without saying it directly. The trust I had shown was being weaponized against me. My generosity turned into a tool for my own replacement. Every late night I had stayed, every extra mile I had gone, every piece of wisdom I had shared, it was all part of a calculated strategy to make me obsolete. The learning that came from this betrayal was bitter but necessary. I realized that in today's professional environment, loyalty is often seen as weakness, dedication as desperation, and experience as expendability. The corporate world doesn't reward those who give everything. It exploits them until they have nothing left to offer. My years of faithful service were being repaid with systematic elimination, my trust with calculated deception. The workplace I had believed in was teaching me that survival requires protection, not just performance. The disappointment of discovering that good intentions don't guarantee fair treatment still stings. I had operated under the assumption that hard work and loyalty would be recognized and rewarded, that helping others succeed would secure my own position. But the reality was much harsher. I was being used as a bridge for someone else's advancement, then discarded once that bridge was no longer needed. The professional environment I trusted was about to deliver its final blow. There was no termination letter, no dramatic confrontation, no clear ending. Instead, there was a gradual hollowing out, a systematic emptying of my professional identity. I remained physically present, but spiritually, I was already gone. They removed tasks one by one, revoked my access to systems I had helped implement, began treating me as if I were already transitioning out. The trust I had placed in the organization was being used to orchestrate my departure without the courtesy of honesty. It's a peculiar form of professional torture, being erased while still being expected to smile and cooperate. When I was removed from the project without explanation, the system I had personally implemented was transferred to him via a cold, impersonal email. No conversation, no clear reasoning, no acknowledgement of my years of dedication to that initiative. The professional environment I had trusted was communicating my obsolescence through administrative efficiency, rather than human decency. The frustration of being discarded like outdated equipment was overwhelming, but the lack of basic respect was what truly broke something inside me. They couldn't even be bothered to lie to my face. The meeting room where nobody listened to me anymore became my personal hell. During discussions, my suggestions were systematically ignored, dismissed with polite nods that meant nothing. Minutes later, he would present the same ideas with slightly different wording, and suddenly everyone was nodding enthusiastically. The professional environment I had helped build was now treating my voice as background noise, while amplifying his every whisper. My experience had become invisible, my insights worthless, my presence merely tolerated until they could figure out how to remove me entirely. The phrase that sealed my fate was delivered with practiced corporate sympathy. "You have so much experience. Perhaps it's time for a new challenge." The manager tried to smile while saying it, but her eyes couldn't meet mine. The words were coded language for, "You're too expensive and too old, and we need you gone." The trust I had shown in this organization was being repaid with euphemistic dismissal, wrapped in the language of opportunity. They were offering me the chance to leave voluntarily before they made the decision for me. The emotional disconnection happened before the formal one ever came. I began going to work like someone attending their own wake daily, going through the motions without any real investment. What had once been a source of pride became mechanical routine, performed with the detachment of someone who knows they're already dead. The professional environment I had once loved was now just a space I occupied while waiting for the inevitable end. Every day felt like a goodbye I was too proud to voice. The realization that I had been strategically isolated was both shocking and predictable. They had systematically removed my responsibilities, excluded me from decisions, redirected my relationships, all while keeping me around long enough to complete the knowledge transfer. The learning from this betrayal was harsh but necessary. I was never a valued employee, just a resource to be extracted and discarded. My loyalty had been exploited, my trust weaponized, my dedication used as a tool for my own replacement. The acceptance that this was always the plan brought a strange kind of peace. I stopped fighting the current and started preparing for what would come next. The professional environment I had trusted was teaching me that survival requires adaptation, not just excellence. The workplace betrayal was complete, but my story wasn't over. Sometimes the most important learning comes from our greatest disappointments. I waited for recognition, for acknowledgement, for at least a simple thank you for the overtime hours, for the knowledge I had shared, for the years of unwavering dedication. But the silence was deafening, more violent than any direct confrontation. The professional environment I had served faithfully was preparing to erase me without ceremony, without gratitude, without even the courtesy of honest communication. The trust I had placed in human decency was being shattered by corporate indifference. It's remarkable how silence can be more destructive than any harsh words. The last report I submitted without reviewing marked a turning point in my relationship with work. They sent an urgent request, and I responded automatically, fulfilling the task out of habit rather than care. But for the first time in years, I didn't double-check my work, didn't polish every detail, didn't stay late to ensure perfection. Not out of negligence, but out of complete emotional exhaustion. The frustration of giving everything to people who saw me as expendable had finally broken my spirit. When you realize your excellence isn't valued, mediocrity becomes a form of self-preservation. The HR representative who treated me like a number, rather than a human being, embodied everything wrong with corporate culture. I was called in for an alignment conversation. Corporate speak for, "We're deciding your fate." They wanted to know if I saw myself there in the coming months, as if I had any real choice in the matter. The professional environment I had trusted was asking me to participate in my own elimination. to make their decision easier by pretending it was mine. The learning from this interaction was brutal but necessary. I was never a person to them, just a resource to be managed. When they offered me the chance to leave without resistance, the proposal was crystal clear in its calculated coldness. A quiet agreement, a silent exit, no fuss, no farewell celebrations, no letter of appreciation. Just a sterile email stating, "We appreciate your contribution," past tense, already written like an obituary. The trust I had shown in this organization was being repaid with the opportunity to disappear, without making anyone uncomfortable. They wanted to erase me so completely that future employees would never know I had existed. Nobody looked me in the eyes on that final day, and that told me everything I needed to know about the character of the people I had worked alongside. I left carrying a small box containing years of my professional life, while colleagues actively avoided crossing paths with me. The professional environment I had helped build was now treating me like a contagious disease, something to be avoided until it was gone. Even he, the one who had benefited most from my mentorship, couldn't be bothered to say goodbye. The betrayal was complete, but the cowardice was somehow worse. The realization that my years of service meant nothing to them was perhaps the most liberating disappointment of my career. I had wasted so much energy trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I was worthless. The loyalty I had shown was never reciprocated, the trust never honored, the dedication never valued. The professional environment I had believed in was just a machine that consumed dedication and produced profit, with no regard for the human cost. But sometimes the most important learning comes from our deepest disappointments. The understanding that they were always going to discard me brought an unexpected sense of freedom. I stopped taking their judgment personally and started seeing it as a reflection of their values, not my worth. The workplace betrayal was complete, but it was also educational. I learned that my value doesn't depend on their recognition, that my expertise exists independently of their acknowledgement. The real question wasn't why they didn't appreciate me. It was why I had needed their approval so desperately. I fought not to let that experience define me, but for weeks, my identity seemed to have been left in that conference room. Starting over felt like learning to breathe again after nearly drowning. The professional environment I had trusted for so long had stripped away not just my job, but my sense of self-worth. The trust I had placed in the system was replaced by a deep skepticism about corporate loyalty and human nature. Recovery from workplace betrayal isn't just about finding new employment. It's about rebuilding your faith in your own value. The learning process was painful but necessary for my survival. The mornings when I couldn't bring myself to make the bed reflected a deeper paralysis that settled into my bones. I spent days without direction, without purpose, without the structure that work had provided for so many years. The silence in my house felt heavier than the silence I had endured at the office. The frustration of having my routine destroyed was compounded by the realization that I had let my job become too central to my identity. When they took away my professional role, I temporarily lost my sense of who I was underneath the title. The colleagues who didn't call spoke louder than those who did, revealing the shallow nature of workplace relationships. People who had claimed to admire my work, who had sought my advice, who had shared coffee and complaints, they all vanished as quickly as my access badge was deactivated. Their absence was more telling than any exit interview could have been. The professional environment I had trusted was built on convenience rather than genuine connection. When I was no longer useful, I was no longer worthy of their time or attention. The small consulting opportunity that gave me new purpose came through a friend who valued my experience rather than my age. She asked for help organizing data for her project, and for the first time in months, someone wanted my expertise rather than my compliance. That simple request reminded me that my knowledge had value beyond the narrow confines of my former workplace. The trust she showed in my abilities helped restore my confidence in my own worth. Sometimes the smallest gestures of respect can rebuild what years of betrayal had torn down. The resume I rewrote with trembling hands wasn't just about listing functions and achievements. It was about remembering that I had value before them, and would continue to have value after them. Each accomplishment I documented was a small act of rebellion against their narrative that I was obsolete. The professional environment I had left behind had tried to convince me I was worthless, but my track record told a different story. The learning from this exercise was profound. My worth wasn't determined by their recognition, but by my own achievements and integrity. The realization that I had been grieving not just a job, but a version of myself was both painful and liberating. I had been mourning the loss of my naive belief in corporate fairness, my trust in loyalty being rewarded, my faith in meritocracy. The workplace betrayal had killed those illusions, but it had also freed me from them. Without the burden of false expectations, I could see the professional world more clearly and protect myself more effectively. Sometimes disappointment is the price we pay for wisdom. The slow rebuilding of my confidence happened one small victory at a time. One consultation, one project, one person who valued what I brought to the table. The trust I had lost in others began to transform into trust in myself. I stopped seeking validation from external sources and started generating it internally. The professional environment that had rejected me was no longer the measure of my worth, but the most important discovery was still waiting to be made. Today, when I look back, I feel less anger and more clarity about what really happened. They never valued what was invisible to them: loyalty, generosity, silent dedication. But through that painful learning, I discovered something invaluable about myself and the professional world. The trust I had placed blindly in corporate fairness was naive, but the experience taught me to trust my own judgment instead. The workplace betrayal that nearly destroyed me ultimately liberated me from illusions that were holding me back. Sometimes our greatest disappointments become our most powerful teachers. I never again teach without recognition or protection of my intellectual contributions. I can still help others, but I don't give everything away for free anymore. My knowledge has history, has cost, has value that must be acknowledged and compensated. The professional environment taught me that generosity without boundaries becomes exploitation. The learning from that experience was brutal but necessary. I had to develop the business acumen to protect my own interests while still maintaining my helpful nature. Wisdom means knowing when to open your hand and when to keep it closed. The difference between being useful and being used became crystal clear through painful experience. Today, I can recognize the warning signs: excessive flattery without substance, promises without timelines, requests for knowledge without reciprocal value. The trust I now offer is earned rather than freely given, measured rather than unlimited. The professional environment that betrayed me taught me to read people's motivations more accurately. The frustration I once felt at being used has transformed into confidence in my ability to spot and avoid similar situations. I wasn't less valuable for being older or more experienced. They made it seem like I was outdated when what I actually possessed was irreplaceable institutional knowledge and ethical standards. The qualities they dismissed as old-fashioned, integrity, loyalty, genuine competence, are exactly what's missing in today's professional environment. Their inability to value depth over superficiality was their loss, not my deficiency. The learning that came from this realization was liberating. I stopped trying to be what they wanted and started celebrating what I actually was. If I could say something to anyone starting their career now, it would be this: teaching and mentoring are beautiful things, but learn to protect yourself while doing them. Not everyone who listens to you actually sees you as a person worth respecting. The professional environment can be a jungle where kindness is mistaken for weakness and generosity for desperation. The trust you show should be proportional to the trust you receive. Share your knowledge, but always retain ownership of your expertise. The superpower that came from this experience was more profound than any promotion or recognition I had ever received. I learned that my worth doesn't depend on their acknowledgement, that my expertise exists independently of their validation, that my integrity remains intact regardless of their betrayal. The professional environment that tried to diminish me actually revealed my true strength. When you discover you can survive the worst kind of workplace betrayal and come out stronger, You realize you were never as vulnerable as you thought. The most important lesson of all is that loyalty should be a two-way street, not a one-way sacrifice. I now choose my professional relationships as carefully as I choose my personal ones, looking for mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. The trust I offer is precious because it's informed by experience rather than naivety. The workplace may still have its betrayals and disappointments, but I'm no longer an easy target. I've learned to value myself enough to demand that others do the same.